So I prayed, so why am I sick? This is one that I've had a lot of survivors who have come to me and they've said, you know, those first 2 chapters, they were good and all that, but this is the one. This was the one that hit home for me. Because you know, you go back to that place, and if you believe God is big, and you believe that He is in control, then you believe in prayer. And you believe that prayer works. And yet, you got the knee pads to show from the prayers that you've been doing. And you can sit there and you can tell me the prayers that didn't get answered the way you asked them to be answered. And so then that kind of starts a thing with God. You know, God, I asked, were you there? Were you listening? You know, why didn't this one end up working out the way? I don't see why I couldn't get this one answered. You know, and I'm sure we can go around the room and all of us can end up coming up with prayers that were not answered. And so then why? So how does that work? How does God get to be so big and so in control and yet not being able to answer all my prayers the way that I'm requesting? And here's kind of how I've thought about that. Hope this helps you guys. God has this great intention. His greatest purpose is to be able to bring all of His children back to Him. That is His ultimate purpose. Everything else that He does is secondary. When you look at the life of Jesus, there's times when He stops healing people so that He can leave and go and preach the Word. There's no question that the salvation of people is His main purpose and His main goal. And so what happens is that we throw our prayers into God's will. You know how they like to tell you, okay, you need to just pray and say, but if it's your will, God, you know. But what is that? What's His will? Well, His will is to gather His people towards Him. So to me, it pictures kind of like a mountain stream. When we were growing up in Florida, my brother, sister, and I, we used to go camping with our parents up in North Carolina because everybody leaves Florida in the summer. It is too hot. And this was back in the days before air conditioning. Florida was a whole different place back in those days. So everybody went to North Carolina. We'd go up to the North Carolina mountains, and we'd be driving along, and all of a sudden my dad would pull over to the side of the road. He'd say, I smell a creek. I smell it. There's water over there. And I mean, it probably was, actually my dad came and heard me do a portion of this talk last spring. It was the first time it dawned on me. We probably went over a bridge about a quarter mile back. I'm honest, 48 years old before I figured this out. It's not pretty. But anyway, so yeah, I smell water. There's a creek back there. We would go back in there and we would start playing in the creek. I mean cold creeks, not like the creeks around here, cold mountain creeks. And we would get this great idea that we would build a dam. And when we dammed up the water of the creek, there would be this great swimming pool, and we would go swimming. And somehow or another, by the time we got the dam done, it was always time to go home. But that was always what the plan was. And we would start moving rocks and moving them around and placing them in there. And there's some things I learned about creeks while I did this. One is that you can't really stop the water. You can't really stop the water. The creeks have a tendency, if they're not sided by mountains, they start going around. And suddenly they start getting wider this way. They'll go around the dam. Or they'll start finding their ways to be able to kind of trickle through the little rocks because there's still all the little holes there where they can still get through. Or they'll just kind of turn into a little waterfall and just start humping right over the top of that dam. And the water keeps moving. Well, my vision of this is that is the will of God. The will of God, you can't stop it. You just can't stop it. He is intentional about being reconciled with His children, and that's His plan. But we are praying with rocks. And we're taking these rocks and laying them into this creek and saying, God, what about this one? What about this one? Can you take your will and just take it and just move it right around my rock? Can you take this prayer and have it fit into your will and let it still move around? That's the power of our prayer. Our prayer doesn't change God's will, but we try to find ways to join with His will in such a way that He can honor that. And you know what? Sometimes you're putting this great big rock down, but there's this little one right here that God's got His eyes on. There's this little pebble right in front of there. He's like, I can't put that there because I need to move this little pebble right here to be able to be part of my will. And so I need to pick your rock back up. But God wants us to pray for the desires of our heart. There's no question about that. That is what He wants. He wants us to pray big, He wants us to pray consistently, and He wants us to pray along the way. You know? It's important to pray the little prayers along the way so that He can show you, see, I was listening. See, I was listening. You know? Well, how about just this next treatment next week, God? Can we end up, you know, not having this happen? Okay, all right. Just the little ones along the way are so important. All the little prayers along the way. Okay? All right. So let me see where we're going with this next. So prayer impacts God's plan, but not his purpose. Let me read one more little blurb for you guys out here. The blue tab. Your little blue tab. Okay. God's will is like the water, and your prayers are like the rocks. Asking the creek to bend one way and then another. When you pray for wisdom, peace, or healing, you're placing a rock in God's will by asking for the desires of your heart. God hungers to fill your every desire as long as his will still flows towards his reconciliation with his children. Putting God's purpose above your desires takes your relationship with God to a place where trust, faith, and submission are more than words. Do you really believe that God knows what is best for you? Sweet friend, believe these three things. God is more than able to heal your cancer. God is more than able to protect you through any treatment. And God is more than able to carry you into his omnipotent, loving arms. Trust him. He hears the prayers you speak, the prayers you think, and especially the prayers you only feel. God will always take care of you, his beloved child.